public questions? I don't believe we.
None received, Chairman.
Okay, minutes. To prove as correct the record of minutes of meeting of the Working Party held on Monday the 9th of October 2023. Should just go through as per page, and if everybody's got anything to raise, if you could raise it. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Okay. I just have one that I'd like to ask for, if we can. I read these, but I wasn't here. If I could have an update on the local plan, please, Mark.
Yeah, so I did circulate some papers about this, I think last week or possibly the week before, just advising that the appointed inspector has now published his what are called MIQs, matters, issues and questions for examination. They're divided into 11 sort of broad categories. I think about 20 odd pages of questions. So there are multiple questions under each of the matters. And everybody gets the opportunity to now respond to the inspector. So although the questions are sort of framed as if he's asking the local authority, he's asking everybody that made representation on the local plan at the Regulation 19 consultation stage, essentially to lay out their cases and their arguments in formal written submission statements. They've got to be submitted by everybody by 5th of January. We're going to try and do that before the Christmas break. So we're aiming for the 18th of December to submit our final sort of statements. And then there's a draft programme of hearing sessions, which are programmed for late January, starting on the 23rd, running through to the first week of March, on the basis that the inspector will sit for a week, then have 2 weeks off, then sit for another week, then have 2 weeks off, and then sit for a third week. Each week comprises of 3 formal sitting days and 1 reserved day. So we won't hold sessions on Monday. Sessions will be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Fridays are held in reserve for business that might overflow from one session. So the task now for officers is to submit formal statements, basically like an appeal sort of statement of case, outline why we think the plan is doing the right thing, why it's sound and why it's legally compliant. And those statements will then form the basis of the verbal sort of discussion that will happen at the hearing sessions. We're not surprised by the identification of issues, matters and questions. What's in there is highly predictable, because it's based on the Regulation 19 representations. And what the inspector has to do is to ask a question to provide a hook for people to make comments against. So it's a very comprehensive sort of list of questions covering all of the issues which were raised. We think the meat of it is around the housing target discussion, and we're pitching for a slightly lower housing target. All the questions that were raised around the deliverability of growth at North Walsham, given the scale of that and off-site highway impacts, and when and how can that actually happen. There's clearly a debate to be had about the settlement hierarchy, and in particular the small growth villages, which were quite contentious. Lots of people made representations about whether there should be growth in the smaller villages. If there should, how much, and by what mechanism should that be delivered, and is delivery certain? So there's probably going to be a rigorous debate about that. And then I would say there are probably a dozen sort of areas of questioning which look at whether the council's position on pushing standards in various places is properly justified by the evidence. Why are we doing what we're doing, and is it adequately justified? So as I say, no significant surprises. It's good we're now moving on to that next stage and getting through the process.
Okay, thank you very much for that update, Mark. Could I have a proposer and a seconder for those? Councillor Toy, Councillor Fisher. Sorry. Everybody happy with those? Yeah. Item 4, items of urgent business.
None, Chairman.
Okay. Before we go on to item 5, just a quick reminder, make sure your mobiles, etc. turned off. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, sorry. Okay, item 5, declarations of interest. Councillor Halding.
Hello, I've got a pecuniary interest and I have got dispensation from the Standards Committee to take part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's been duly noted. Brings on to item 6 of the agenda, which is the Glaven Valley Conservation Area appraisal. Obviously, with these very in-depth 278-page document, interesting reading. Thanks to everybody that's put all the work in. There must be a huge amount of work into that. It's really appreciated. So we have options to be considered is to adopt the revised draft document or not to. Obviously, we're going to go round everybody with their areas of questions or opinions that they might have, or issues, or things that they need to raise. So with that, across to the floor, if anybody has a question.
Sorry, Chairman, did you want the case officer, the officer, to present her report?
Yes, sorry,
there?
yes, I do apologise. Yes, and case officer to do their bit. Thank you.
Right, so we're just going to go through the results of the consultation, some of the feedback that we received, the changes that were proposed following that consultation, and then next steps and our recommendations. So we did a final round of consultation where we were looking to seek the views on the changes that we made to the document following the previous consultation. And as part of this, the document was made available for public consultation across a period between the 6th of October and the 27th of October. And this included publishing the document on the website, direct notification to anyone who submitted comments previously, as well as notification to the parish councils, local members, and any households newly affected by boundary changes. This is in addition to the usual methods we use, publishing on social media channels and with a press release as well. So there were a few themes that we received in comments to this consultation. So concern about 2 fields on the edge of Sharrington that had not been included within the conservation area boundary. There's a lack of coverage on Sharrington itself within the text of the appraisal. Proposal for Sharrington's telephone box to be locally listed, and a suggestion of the removal of the quarry at Breck Farm, which is south of Hunworth, and some general text errors and omissions resulting from the amendments that have been made. There is a full list of the proposed changes within the report, but some of the highlights include there were additions into the text to give more background on Sharrington, which includes the watermill, medieval cross and Sharrington Hall. We need to amend the boundary maps to make them a bit clearer to understand. And there's going to be an addition to the text which highlights the sensitivity of the River Glaven to domestic sewage discharge. The Sharrington's telephone kiosk will be added to the local list. And in terms of the boundary review, there will be an amendment to include the fields either side of Hall Lane and Sharrington, with the boundary running along the south of the A148. And the area which contains the quarry and Breck Farm south of Hunworth will be removed from the conservation area. So the report before you today asks that Working Party recommend to Cabinet to adopt the Glaven Valley Conservation Area appraisal following the amendments. Recommend to Cabinet to agree the proposed boundary changes as recommended in the draft, the appraisal document and those further changes detailed in this report, and that they be published in accordance with the Planning Act. Also recommend to Cabinet to agree the proposed local listings as identified within the draft appraisal. If the Working Party conclude to make the recommendations put forward today to Cabinet, then the document can be adopted following the next meeting on December 4th. Once adopted, the document will become a material consideration in the planning process. And just a note to say, in order to adopt, we also have to advertise in the London Gazette, so formality. then the boundary can be plotted as well.
Yeah, can I just add, I'm sorry, I'm Russell Williams for the benefit of YouTube. I'm the Assistant Director for Planning here. That presentation was structured following a discussion with Councillor Brown last week, where we reached the conclusion it probably wasn't beneficial for the working party to go over every last bit of history associated with this document, because you've discussed it on a number of occasions. So Ms Hogarth's presentation did focus on the last phase rather than the complete story, following discussions with Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much. So, having said that, over to the floor, Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd just like to support basically what Officer Williams has said. I think that we've seen quite a considerable exposure to this consultation process. I think we've had a considerable input to it, and I personally am perfectly satisfied to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dixon. Anybody else? Councillor Toy.
Just a curiosity question, the telephone box, I assume it's a red telephone box, but its location and that obviously is part of the setting. So except that, who will be responsible for maintaining it? Because normally a locally listed asset has someone responsible to maintain it. So that's the only thing, just out of curiosity, really. I'm sure there's something in place. But thank you.
Beg your pardon, when the government were doing an accelerated resurvey, they handpicked a selection of K6 telephone boxes that were in specifically sensitive locations. It was, rather than list all of them, which would have meant hundreds and thousands across the country, they cherry picked several. This one is a K6 telephone box, but at the time it was missed off the national statutory list, so it makes sense for it to be included as a locally listed building. It has the same level of significance as some of the statutory listings we have, but ultimately, until it's adopted by a local community, and we do have some phone boxes that fit that bill, it's a BT maintenance issue.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I'm pleased to see the changes that you made. Slightly disappointed about the car park in Clyde, but I understand your reasons, and disappointed about the permitted development rights. That came quite strongly from the community. Just with regard to the River Glaven, for example, would this now be taken as a material planning consideration if someone applied to put in a drainage into the River Glaven? Would it actually have some impact on that planning decision? I referred to a case recently.
If something is actually mentioned in the appraisal document, then as Alana said in the presentation, it will become a material planning consideration. So I think we're proposing to include a piece in the document as it gets adopted around the sensitivities of the Glaven to sediment washing. So it will be something that will get factored into the overall planning balance. It's something our ecologist will look at anyway in preparing his comments. But obviously the River Glaven is a central part of the Glaven Valley Conservation Area. So we would clearly need to be mindful of any impacts of development on the sensitivities of the river.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Harley? Or do you want to further? Anybody else? Oh, I've got a couple of questions myself first. I have actually read it well and truly. The first one I have is, I noticed on page 147 of your document, you've got a statement here, in addition, the sea around Norfolk is shallow, ideal for wind farms, etc. particularly on clear days, such wind farms can detract from views of rising electricity generated offshore needs to be onshore and fed into the national grid, which necessitates construction of substation new pylons. Such structures would detract from the Glaven Valley. It doesn't clarify, are they allowed? Are they not allowed? What is, to me, that seems a pointless statement when I read it. It's very nice. I appreciate that it could do, but what is the purpose of it?
Well, the primary purpose of any conservation area appraisal document is to identify threats and opportunities. So I think that paragraph particularly is just merely pointing out that some of the views out of the conservation area and potentially some of the onshore infrastructure could have an impact on the character and appearance of the area. Now, ultimately, it will be down to the individual planning applications, most likely through the National Infrastructure Committee. So it would be a sort of central government-led planning balance. But that paragraph is primarily identifying threats that could be posed to the conservation area in much the same way as we've had. Well, I know in Suffolk from friends, been a considerable discussion around some of the pylons running through the Suffolk countryside. So within the Glaven Valley appraisal, it's not something you can come to an overall conclusion on acceptability. It's just flagging up that these are potentially a threat, depending on the specifics of the individual proposal, and it will be for the planning decision maker to weigh that in the balance.
Okay, thank you. And the second question I have is about PVC windows. I appreciate having read this, and it's mentioned in a couple of places, and I may well have missed it. You can point out if I have. Obviously, listed buildings, etc., already have that to stop PVC built, windows and fenestry being put onto them. But it seems a very sort of draconian if they're not listed buildings, etc. Where you put here, you PVC windows and the lives require replacement should be done preferably with painted timber windows if this is impossible. But nothing's impossible, and nowadays you do get some very, very good PVC windows. My sister's just had some done, and you cannot tell. You really, they weren't cheap, but you cannot tell. And later on, it mentions that the PVC windows, one of the reasons being is that they're not recyclable, etc., and not very environmentally friendly. And goes on to say about leaky windows doing well for the houses, etc., which also, if it's an historic house, I understand. But this seems to refer to houses that aren't actually listed or anything, but are on the periphery to make the whole thing look better. And I think that's quite an onerous cost on business and individuals, or could be, I should say. So I wondered why it was so prominent.
Again, I think if you look at any conservation area appraisal, essentially most conservation areas are looking at the historic environment. That's their primary focus. Now, within that, inevitably, you do get modern buildings that perhaps don't make the same contribution, aren't so sensitive to change. So I think the crucial word for me in that sentence you read out was preferably. So I think the conventional view is that plastic, yes, certainly some of its visual properties have improved, certainly with the likes of sash windows now, with the wood grain effect foils that can be applied to the frame. Unless you have a particularly trained eye, a good proportion of the population could probably not spot the difference. Equally, with the wrong type of windows, particularly on some casement windows, they are inferior in terms of their appearance, the layout, the heaviness of the frames. So it's a general preference that you'll probably find expressed in most conservation areas. In reality, it's a horses for courses pragmatic decision-making process for individual buildings. So as I say, some 70s bungalows, for instance, it's not inconceivable that they would have been built with plastic windows. So, in that instance, we as a council wouldn't be looking for the owners to install timber sashes. That would be wholly inappropriate. So it's, as I say, it's pragmatism. on a lot of buildings, certainly the less sensitive buildings, installing plastic windows won't have a major impact visually. So it's again a general preference rather than an absolute requirement, I think is how I describe it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that is the way I read it. It was just the word impossible in there. But where this is impossible, you may have PVC windows. That threw me. Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to the officers. It's an incredible report, so thank you. Just going back to that point about homeowners and windows, how will they know which windows we prefer? Is there a mechanism where they can write into the council or email planning to say, are these acceptable for my house?
Yes, is the answer to that. We do offer an inquiry service online. Now, sometimes that will lead to a formal planning application, but through the let's call them the vagaries of the permitted development system, it doesn't necessarily follow that all replacement windows need planning permission. So what we usually say to individual homeowners is to submit their proposals, obviously identify the existing windows and also what ideally they would like to replace them with. And then we can advise them firstly on whether permission is actually required. And if it is, then give them a view on acceptability. Sometimes, it's a straightforward, yes, these will be fine. Other times we would make suggestions around the layout or the design of the windows to try and, hopefully they can achieve what they want without any harm being caused to a designated area.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any further queries or questions? Councillor Hankin.
Mr. Chairman, does the map on page 35 address the issues on page 17, section J? Boundary maps be reviewed to make them clearer to understand.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah. The map that's included in this pack on page 35, does that address the point made in the correspondence?
Yeah, sorry, I see what you mean now. The draft hasn't been amended yet. So the draft will need to go back to our consultants per cell to have all the changes that we've itemised actioned. So that hasn't happened yet. So the boundary map in the agenda is the former one. So it will be amended. Yeah.
What are the significant issues there?
I think because of the size of the designation, there's been some feedback that it's quite hard to view some of the more detailed areas.
Okay.
So I think we'll just have to have some discussions about how we make it a bit easier to understand.
It's given rise to a number of questions, so
yeah,
appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think just to add to that, for reasons of expedience, really, just that map, because of the sheer size of the Glaven Valley, it needs to be compressed down to such a level to make it something that can be sent out and included in the document. So what we would probably do in reality is have a separate full size map that hasn't been compressed down, that you could then zoom in on much greater detail and clarity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hankin. Any other questions or queries? I believe Councillor Dixon proposed and Councillor Toy, you seconded. Is everybody happy to go with the recommendations? Can I show hands, please? Yes. Thank you very much. Brings on to item 7, exclusion of press and public, which we don't need. So thank you very much, everybody. No, have we any other further business?
No further business on the agenda.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance and your input, and I will close the meeting at 20.